All right. Today we've got a T.R. Russell pocket watch. This watchmaker was from England, and he was the watchmaker of the Queen and the watchmaker of the Admiral. It's noted right on that, stamped right on that pocket watch. And we're putting the stem together here and all of its pieces. And it's quite a complex little movement we have here. It's because it's from the UK. It's a little bit different than what I'm normally used to working on. In fact, it's a lot different than what I'm normally used to working on. And we get the winding and setting mechanisms I'm going to put in there first. And so we've got the stem and the crown and the winding pinion, and I've got a clutch wheel and a setting wheel and a setting lever and a clutch lever and a clutch spring and a crown wheel and a ratchet wheel. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So this particular stem's got a little bit of a bridge I had to put in place here. And so I have to make sure I put this toothpick down first so I can have control over screwing these little screws in and not have that bridge flop out on me, because that's no fun at all when that happens. And I put the second screw in there and I make sure that's in nice and tight. And usually I have these things a little bit loose and then I tighten them up, because you don't want to strip the screw and you don't want the thing to be in the wrong position. And the setting mechanisms here were a little bit tricky. I apply a little bit of oil to the stem here and to the crown wheel to make sure that it's just lubricated a little. It's steel on steel, so I want to make sure there's a bit of lubrication in here with steel on steel. Plus I've got that the clutch wheel that's going to move back and forth on that stem, and it's going to be intersecting with the setting wheel. That's the one that's going to be sitting right on top. I haven't installed that yet. And this has got a bit of a lever here that's I call that probably the clutch lever that I'm putting in place there now. And it had an independent screw, that one with the big head that kind of just sat there, and that lever just sort of rests against that screw. Yeah, and so I had to make sure that screw was in, but it bottomed out pretty fast, and I could tighten it up and not actually squish that lever down, which was nice. And once I had that in position, I was able to see whether its action was appropriate. I did not want to break the spring. Very dangerous if I break the spring. I really couldn't make one like this. I'd have to try to acquire another one just like it. Would have been very difficult. So I put that spring in place, make sure it was in the right hole, and tighten that thing down. And so I got part A done, a little bit of a test there, and make sure there's oil on that stem so it's nice and lubricated, and that way the action is good on this mechanism. All right, the next job here is going to put in, this wheel here would be the minute wheel? Yeah, it would be the minute wheel. No, it can't be the minute wheel. It's an intermediate wheel that's used between the setting wheel and the minute wheel. So it's an intermediate wheel. And this one had 3 screws that I had to put in. And I remembered that the smallest screw is the one facing inward the most. See, that screw just jumped out. They're like Mexican jumping screws. So the one on the inward side was the shorter of the 3 screws. So I had to take note of that when I put it back together. So you want to put the right screws back in the right place if they are different. In this case, it was different, and I had to pay attention to that. So, and again, I use the toothpick again to hold down the part so it just doesn't move when I try to screw it in. So there we go, it's in now, and then I take the smaller screw, and you can almost see that it's smaller. I've sped up the video a bit here so it's not boring for those people that don't like watch assemblies, but it's sped up 4 times. 4 times. So if you count this video being around 20 minutes, whatever 4 times 20, that's what it would be. So I put a little bit of lubrication on the edge there of this wheel, and it's going to spin around freely, and I just move that around in circles. And then I believe later on I take some Rodico to get to that, to clean up the mess. There we go. Clean up the Rodico on the edge so it doesn't spill onto the other gears. God help us if the Rodico gets onto the hairspring or one of those areas where it's really tricky. This part here was very difficult to put in because I had to put the barrel in on the back side and then put the this ratchet wheel on the front side, and that's a click spring right there. So I had to make sure that that was all set up properly. So that click spring went in there, and I basically had to put that click spring in the right place and make sure that the spring holding the click spring back was also in the right place before I put that ratchet wheel on the top. So that's that for that. Then I've got this wheel here, and this wheel is it's a setting wheel again that allow me to interface with the barrel. So when I push in on that in the watch, then that'll engage that and then allow that to interface with the mainspring. So in this case, the mainspring barrel is on the other side, and this wheel that you're seeing me put in right now is going to turn that mainspring barrel and ratchet it forward. So, and that's going to widen the mainspring on the inside of the barrel. So that's how this one works. These are the European pocket watch, so it's a bit different than the American ones I'm always working on. A little trickier maybe because I'm not used to the configuration. The design was okay though. Just had to make sure I took some pictures of this too. And I oiled it up a little bit to allow it to have some freedom of movement. And then I use a toothpick to move it around to make sure there's nice freedom there and it can move and there's no issue at all in that. And then again, put a few drops of oil in the gears. And then when I move those around, it'll spread the oil to the other teeth in the gear. And then I've got better tooth-to-tooth interaction there, which is what you want. So now in this particular this ratchet wheel, you have to stick the barrel through, and then the arbor for the barrel goes through the hole in the top. And then there's a pin you've got to put in. So I decided to use Rodico to keep that in place, so I could flip that around on the other side and stick the barrel in, and then put the ratchet wheel back in with the pin. If I do recall, I had to change my mind later on and do it a different way. Here I'm taking out the cap jewel for the escapement. Or the escapement? No, not the escapement. This was the cap jewel for the balance cock. So the main balance staff lower pivot goes into this. So I made sure that was cleaned out nicely. And I'm rubbing this with a bit of pegwood to get off any gum, and then I'm going to rub that with some Rodico right after to take off any leftovers. So this is it's a little bit of an anal retentive, detailed way of cleaning a jewel, but it works really well. In this case, I'm just taking that pegwood to make sure that the top part of the jewel is also clean. And you put the oil on the cap jewel and you flip it around. And I made a little tiny mark on that cap jewel, a witness mark, so I knew it could go back in the same place each time. Now I screwed that up, so I put it back and I had to re-oil it because it fell. So I didn't want to not have oil on there, so I had to do it all over again. So that's my recommendation if the jewel setting actually falls down. That's the peanut butter sandwich with the peanut butter falling down towards the floor. That's a piece of bread with peanut butter, and the peanut butter always lands with the peanut butter hitting the floor. You know that. It's peanut butter's law, I think it's called. Peanut law. It's some kind of a physics thing. Not sure. So here we go. Got to attack more problems on this watch. More problems. This was a very, very old watch. I think it's 1880 something or maybe 1890 if I was lucky. But a very old watch. And here I'm just making sure I've got the right wheels in the right position. It's when you take the watch apart, take a photograph with your iPhone or camera of some sort, so you realize or you can recognize which wheels go in first, because they're usually layered. So you have the one wheel going in, the other wheel goes on top of it, and the teeth of that wheel hit the pinion of the other wheel. So you have to know which ones go in first and then put them back in that order. So you're putting them back in the way you took them out. But the best way to deal with this is just to take a picture of the wheels, and that way you can make sure they go in the right place all the time. A little tricky there. Here the wheel fell through and it matched to the pinion, no problem. I had no issue there at all. No problem, no problemo. That's Spanish. No, that's Italian for no problem. And here I'm putting in the, what is that called? I'm putting in the escapement, and then the escapement, that's the fourth wheel I just put in. The other side of that wheel is where the seconds hand fits on. So that's nicely put on, no issue. The funny thing with this watch is that there's no hints on where the plate has to go. But I knew that in this case here, I had to put a barrel in somehow. So I'm trying to figure this one out. So that's the mainspring barrel. I'm thinking, oh, maybe I'll put this in later. That's the hole that's made in the square part of the mainspring barrel. On the other side, you've got that, as I said before, that groove, and you've got to pin the barrel in with that groove. So an interesting thing about this barrel. It's got this star or configuration. I'm trying to remember what the name of that is. If you can remember, you can tell me. I could look it up, but I don't have time because I'm overdubbing this video right now. But this prevents the mainspring to be used. The final part of the power of the mainspring is not used, and the beginning part of the mainspring is not used. So that sort of controls the amount of power when you initially wind it all the way up. You're not really getting to the very end of that wind. You're getting probably to the 80% mark, and then you're getting probably to the 20% mark when it unwinds. So you get less time out of that mainspring, but your amplitude is a little bit better. The power going through the wheel train is more consistent, or averaged, I guess I should say. So a Fuse watch has a chain and like a gear on your bicycle that rides it down, that does exactly the same thing, but this is their way of doing it back in the day. So I put these screws in here, and I don't put them in very tight. I want to make sure I don't have any problem with the gears and touching and tapping the gears. So I tap them and I make sure they're all in the right position. And then in this case here, I've got to turn this little winding mechanism, which is not easy to turn. I use a special kind of you'll see the clamp I use to grab onto that winding mechanism, because it's not your standard bench key that'll turn that. So it's a bit of a pain in the Batinsky. And here I'm putting in the pallet fork. It's not your typical pallet fork, because the stones are on the side of the pallet. There's a name for that. Again, I didn't look the name up because I know how to maintain these, but I can't remember the names all the time. But it's a very unique Versage, I think, escapement or something, some name like that. And it's if you look at the escapement very close, it's got these little pokey pins coming out, and it's not like the little feet that you normally see in an escapement on a North American watch. So it's a very unique escapement. And here I'm trying to line this escapement up, and I've got a bit of a bridge here that I've got to put over the escapement, the pallet fork together, which is an odd configuration, because usually the escapement and the escapement is inside the plate, and the pallet fork is on another plate of some sort, another bridge of some sort. So here the bridge holds both the escapement and the pallet fork. Now, lesson learned here, if you allow this movement to the wheel train to run, if you take this pallet fork out, it'll spin out. And I had a problem with that, which caused me the lower pivot on the escapement broke on me, causing me to get my lathe out and make a brand new one. So I didn't make a video on that, but I had to repair that by repivoting the escapement and putting it back. So here I'm oiling the top, and you'll see the watch working. But the problem with this watch was I believe it was the, let me think what was happening here. It was over banking, I think, when I got it all running. So it would basically hit the other side of the pins, the banking pins, so I had to deal with that. So here I'm putting this ratchet wheel on, line it up perfectly, and then there's a little tiny brass pin I have. There it is there, and I got to straighten that pin up so I can put it into that barrel. So I'm putting it into my staking set, and I found the right hole for that pin, and then I can grab that pin and bend it. So this is what I'm doing. So I'm just trying to move that pin to the exact right hole. If I pick a hole that's too big, that pin falls all the way through, and then I'm hunting for a pin within my staking set. But I managed to find the right pin, and I managed to squeeze that pin and straighten that pin up. So you can see me tugging at it a bit just to kind of straighten that up. And that's just a little piece of brass, that pin. So, and it just goes on the top, and I'm squeezing it with the pliers, and I've got it pretty much straight. Just making sure I get it as straight as possible so I can reinstall it. And there we go with the ratchet wheel. I move the click spring out of the way, and I make sure I've got that little trench is lined up with the holes, because if it's on the other side, it's not going to work. So I've got that. I take a needle that I have, and I got the needle in the pin vise and push that needle against the end of that pin. So again, it's ×4, so it took a little longer than you think. Here I'm pushing down the that's the cannon pinion. I was able to push this down first because there was enough movement or real estate for me to push that minute wheel in, and I pushed the hour wheel in, and I think we're all ready now to work on this again. But I remember we're turning this thing over, the hour wheel fell out in the there. So you grab that with this little jaws of life here, and I'm able to wind it with this flat jawed Thingamajobby Doohickey. I love that name. So that's very convenient. So there we go. And I'm just testing whether this is snapping back and forth when I have power on the mainspring, and it is. So it's snapping back and forth, which is a good sign. So the opening of that pallet fork would hit the impulse jewel of the balance wheel. That's below I think it's a single roller here on the balance. And I remember I had an issue with this, and the issue was that the pallet fork was swinging back after it had gone through, which is causing me a banking issue. So it ended up on the jewel would end up the wrong side of the pallet fork. So here I'm very carefully removing the upper jewel. Here I'm moving the cap jewel so I can get at the jewel itself, and I want to clean that cap jewel because it's the end of the pivot of the balance is sitting on that cap jewel. So I'm pegging out the hole here for that jewel, and I'm going to clean that jewel just like I clean the other ones. So all by hand. So you get a good job when you're doing it by hand, and then just rub off any excess oil, and then take my Rodico and clean that up again just like I did last time. And a little bit of oil on that, and you'll see the dexterity and the coolness of my tweezer abilities as I just take that little jewel and put that in place like it's nothing. Right, and there we go. Line that up. So I'm just rotating it ever so slightly to line that up with the screw holes, because there's a slight half moon indent in that upper jewel that lets me put those screws in, and they'll tuck in where that indent is. So, and I use my my balance cock holder, the pin of it there, to actually support the balance cock while I'm pushing that in. So, and I'm not having to push really hard to screw these back in, because my what are they called? I think they're called screwdrivers. Yeah, they're well dressed, as they say. So I dress my screwdrivers up nice so they'll fit in the slot where they need to fit. And here I'm putting some of that oil on there that you saw it. I held it there for a few seconds, but that oil is great, and it helps. It's like a grease. It's almost like a gel, and it kind of, you put it on both pallet, the stones on the pallet fork, and it works exceptionally well. So there I put the balance back in place. I got my finger blocking it, of course, so you can't see a damn thing. Now I want to get that balance moving just a little bit, so the balance fork, I think, was pointing on the inward side, so I had to enter the balance, I think, on the right-hand side, and then sweep it in, so the mouth of the impulse jewel catches the mouth of the pallet fork. So I was farting around with that and trying to get that in place. It's the trickier part of reassembling a watch. So now I've got it in place. Now I had to do it again. So here I'm rotating it clockwise into place, which means that the pallet fork was on the outside. So I moved it on the inside again. Now I can approach it from this side. Sometimes I fart around with that for 10 minutes to get it right, but sometimes I'm lucky and it just fits in place. And there we go. The watch starts a-ticking. Things are good when the watch starts a-ticking. I've got it reassembled and ready to go. I just have to do the rest of the job, and we're good to go. So that's it for my video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.